Hello to everybody watching out there. Apologies for the short delay. We're going to hand over straight away to Megan Ford, who can introduce the session. It looks as though Jenny is in the background. Jenny may have to go first as Hayley isn't yet on the call. So over to you, Megs.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the next set of sessions at our digital forum. Again, as Harry mentioned, sorry for the delay. It wouldn't be a digital event without some tech problems. So yes, next up we have Jenny Walsh, who is the clinical lead for perinatal mental health, and she's going to be speaking to us about improving patient flow and mental health awareness with technology. So over to you, Jenny.
Good morning, everyone. Just give me a couple of minutes while I share my screen with you all. Hope that you can hear me okay. Okay, so as Megan said, I'm going to talk to you today about improving patient flow and mental health awareness with technology, but really I'm talking to you about how I use digital to solve a couple of problems. I guess that's the gist of it. So who are these two lovely people, and why have I started the presentation with this picture? Well, these are my two adult children, looking slightly the worse for wear, because this was the picture they sent on the family WhatsApp to prove to me they landed safely in San Francisco on holiday earlier this year. And the reason I've started my presentation with them is because they think it's absolutely hilarious that I am even here talking to you about digital, because they're the ones that always have to bail me out when I get stuck with various things on the computer, phoning them up, how do you do this? And I guess I just wanted to make the point that you don't have to be technically minded to work out digital solutions, because I'm certainly not. So I work in the field of perinatal mental health, and I just wanted to start by saying women with the most severe perinatal mental health illnesses get really, really ill. Suicide, as it says there, is still one of the leading causes of maternal death. And whilst there's a whole spectrum of illnesses of varying degrees, the most serious ones need to be treated in a mother and baby unit. And for a time, before I became the clinical lead for the southeast of England, I was the service manager for a service in Hampshire that has both a mother and baby unit and a community team. One of the things about these illnesses is that women need to be treated quite quickly, and it was reaching the national news that women were having to face very long journeys to mother and baby units and long waits in their before they were receiving care, bearing in mind that a lot of these illnesses start in maternity, and that's not the best place to be for anybody if somebody's developing a serious mental health problem.
Jenny, sorry to interrupt. Your slides are actually not appearing on the screen. Would you mind just resharing for us, please?
Oh, okay. Hang on then. That's a worry. You've missed my lovely children. That's a shame.
we can edit it for the on demand, but we can show people now. That'd be great.
How's that? Is that sharing now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
I'm just trying to get it back into slideshow mode.
Super.
She doesn't. Oh, is it done it now?
That's it. Okay. Yeah, we're there. Thanks, Jenny.
So, here we are, very quickly. These are my lovely children that I was talking about. This is the slide about suicide. Just something from the news about the delay women were experiencing. And here's a typical mother and baby unit bedroom. I think this is from the Devon unit, this picture. So what happened to me? It was a typical, very busy Friday night on the ward. And what I noticed was that we were full and we were very, very busy. We had a lot of acuity. But we were getting constant phone calls about beds, seeing if we had any beds. And people that were phoning in, the referrers, all wanted to speak to the nurse in charge. And it was almost like they didn't take no for an answer. So you'd say, oh, well, we're full. And then they'd start trying to give you the whole story about the woman that they were concerned about, as if we would like be able to magic up a bed from somewhere. And I was just aware of how much time this was taking. And later on that night, I went out to supper with some friends. And I just happened to say over supper what had happened that afternoon, and said, it would be great if there was something where you could sort of see at a glance where the bed availability was, and stop at all these unnecessary phone calls and waste of time. And some of the people that I was out to supper with were quite technically minded, and they said, well, that would be really easy to do. So it just got me thinking. So what did I need to do, and what happened next? I had to find some techies who could build it for me. I needed some funding to make sure that it's, to make it happen. Obviously, it was going to cost. And I also needed to get the buy-in from the mother and baby unit staff, because they would have to be updating it on a daily basis. So the buy-in was actually quite easy to achieve, because everybody recognised the problem. So it wasn't as if I had to sell this to people, because it was an issue that was being played out in other mother and baby units. And I was really lucky that the job I was working in at that time, I was able to access some funding. And very naively, to find the techies, I just Googled it, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone, but it worked for me. And I was very lucky, because I found an amazing small company that didn't rip me off, that kept it really simple, and were really brilliant to work with. So this is what we developed, and you can have a look at it on your phones. But in essence, this is WebBeds. So there are 19 mother and baby units in the country. Each little flag shows a mother and baby unit. And the reason that they're RAG rated is because green means that there's a bed available today. Red means there's no beds at all, and no possibility of a bed in the future, in the next few days. But amber means there's a possibility in the next few days, which is quite helpful to know in perinatal, because it might be that you've got a baby that's not fit to leave hospital yet, or a mum that might not be obstetrically good to go yet, but they'll need a bed in a couple of days. So that's quite handy. And then if you click on the flags, it gives you a bit more information. So there's your phone number. You don't have to scrabble around to find the phone number of the unit. And it tells you what I've just talked you through, how many beds are available, and if they think they'll have a bed tomorrow as well. And then it will also show you your closest. So if your nearest mother and baby unit is full, it'll show you your closest and your second closest, which can be helpful, although it's a public facing thing. So I think that's really important, because we've had an example where we've been able to show it to a family when Winchester Mother and Baby Unit was full. And rather than go to anywhere nearer, they chose Manchester, because that's where the in-laws lived. So the in-laws had the 3-year-old and visited every day with the 3-year-old. The dad stayed in Hampshire, went to work, and then went up at the weekends. So that worked really well for them, because they could see exactly in the country where the beds were. So was it successful? I would say it's been a massive success. We think it's saved about £1 million a year in terms of the saving to the referrers, all that wasted time in the mother and baby unit, which obviously was happening on a daily basis. If you imagine the cost of women staying in maternity longer than they need to, I think that's probably a very conservative estimate of how much money it's saved. It receives about 4,000 hits a month, so we know people are using it. It's been a catalyst to further service improvements, which has been great. And that wasn't anything that I had anticipated, but that's been great. Staff absolutely love it. It's so simple to use and it gets great feedback. But the most important thing, the impact on women and birthing people who need to access mother and baby units as soon as possible. You can't put a price on that. That's absolutely priceless. And maybe it's saved lives. I can't prove that to you, but speed is really of the essence with these illnesses. So I suspect it's been really, really helpful. And then what's happened next? So as the hosts of WebBeds, we were seen as a go-to people for problems with anything to do with the mother and baby unit referral process. And I don't think people had had that single place to take stuff before. So it kind of, people were, happy to come to us and tell us different problems. And one of the things that was raised multiple times was that each mother and baby unit had its own referral form. So if you'd filled it in for one and it was full, you then had to fill in another form. So we developed a generic referral form and we embedded it onto WebBeds. And we've also embedded a list of all the perinatal community teams, so it's all in one place. It was shortlisted for an HSJ award, and that was fun going there. And it also gave me the confidence to think about other issues which might benefit from tech solutions, which leads me on to the next project. So within perinatal mental health, unlike most other mental health services, for us, maternity are one of the most significant stakeholders. But midwives were telling us that they knew they needed to ask questions about maternal mental health, but they didn't always have the confidence to deal with the answers. And women would need different levels of intervention depending on the severity of their symptoms. So I just started to wonder, is it possible to build a simple triage tool that uses reliable tools within it to navigate women to the right part of the pathway? And this is what we came up with this time, the Perinatal Pathways tool. So on the left there is what you would see if you opened it up on your phone. And then there's a little bit explanation about it on the right. So under the NHS long-term plan, perinatal services were also tasked to do evidence-based assessments of dads and partners as well as women. So that's something that I'll come on to in a minute. That was a development of this tool. But the aim of the tool is basically to empower users to improve screening rates and increase access to the right bit of the pathway. What we were seeing was that midwives would ask questions about mental health, and if they got any answers that indicated there was a mental health issue, they'd refer straight to a specialist team. And there are other stages within that pathway that they could have used, but they weren't confident enough. So the Pathways tool just has 4 pathways. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. The first one, which we should never take for granted, is the wellness pathway. And it's really important that people remember and get in touch with all the things that keep them well in pregnancy or postnatal. Then the one that the midwives weren't always confident to refer to was IAPT, improving access for psychological therapies services, which deal with the mild to moderate illnesses. Then a specialist perinatal mental health team, and then crisis. So what we did, we used evidence-based tools, PHQ-9 and GAD-7, to screen for anxiety and depression, and also incorporates what we know as the red flag symptoms, which were indicated in the Embrace reports, which indicate severity. And it uses the answers to triage women to the right pathway. And then again, we wanted something that was public facing, so it can be used by health professionals or by the women, birthing people, dads and partners themselves. So does it work was really important to know. we've done an extensive trial in maternity, and we had over 90% accuracy. So we're really delighted, and it's really given us confidence in the tool and the rollout. But it's important that it doesn't ever replace the practitioner. And what we've found is it's been a really good catalyst to having conversations about mental health, because midwives feel a bit more confident because they've got the tool that's actually telling them what the next steps are, but it's opening up those questions about mental health. So that's been a really nice sort of knock-on effect. And what happens next? So we've added in the Dads and Partners triage to support the NHS long-term plan ambition, and we're now piloting it with the Dads and Partners in the same way that we piloted it with maternity. We're collaborating with DadPad, and they want to get it embedded on there. We're hoping to extend it out to primary care to support the work of the GPs. And we have secured some funding to enable us to develop it a little bit more so that we can get some data collection from it. So what have I learned from this project, from these projects, and why have I got a picture here with a couple of people around the water cooler? Well, I guess the first thing I've learned, and the water cooler's there really because I do hear nurses and other health professionals over coffee at the water cooler, and they'll often identify a problem, but they'll say something like what they need to do. And what I've learned from these projects is that there is no they, we are the they. So if you've identified the problem, you're the person that ought to take that forward and highlight to somebody. As I said right back at the beginning, you really don't have to be a tech expert. You really, really don't. I can't stress that enough. You just need to be able to identify the problem. And just remember that wherever you work in health, you are the expert in what you do, and you'll have knowledge that no one else does. So you might be holding that crucial part of the jigsaw puzzle. So never think, you're not working at a high enough level, or, you're only a healthcare support worker, or all these things that people say about themselves. No, you're the expert in what you do. So have the confidence to really think about what you do and what gets in the way of doing it. Keep it as simple as possible, and don't add in anything extra unless it's really clear that A, it's useful to have, and B, it will be used. One of the real issues with tech is that it can do so much, and we often chuck loads of stuff at things. I mean, if you think at home about your washing machine, your dishwasher, how many programs do you actually use compared to the amount of programs that they've got on there? And this is something, and again, I stress I was so lucky with my techies, because right from the start, their whole ethos was lean and clean. And just because it could do things, they wouldn't let me add anything unless it was absolutely clear it was going to be useful. Because what happens is people won't use it. If it's too complicated, they won't use it. What's been lovely, as I said earlier, is that you often end up solving more than you set out to do. And that's great. And these sort of projects take you to the most unexpected places. So I would definitely say come aboard and enjoy the ride. And then I think this kind of sums up digital solutions, or certainly for the things that I've been involved with. The ease of use may be invisible, but its absence sure isn't. So on that quote, I will finish my presentation, and I'll be here for some questions if anybody's got any questions.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That was really interesting. If you could stop sharing your slides, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, so sorry, I forgot to mention earlier, if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the chat box during these sessions. I thought I'd just kick off with a few of my own, if that's okay. So I was just wondering if you could explain the process around how WebBeds is updated and how that's monitored. Does it happen quite timely?
So we we had a chat with all the service managers of the mother and baby units, and we decided that for us, updating it once a day would be the best solution, because it was less pressure on the staff. If you updated it every time you had a discharge, then when people looked at the tool, they wouldn't ever be sure when it was accurate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if people were updating it at all different times. So we picked 11 o'clock in the morning, and we were thinking, because it's a mother and a baby, although we will obviously take admissions 24/7, but if you know someone's coming in, it means you could get them in a timely fashion. If we so by 11 you would probably know who was going that day, and you could update it, and then people could be admitted in a timely way. So that's what we decided on, just to do once a day. Similar bed management systems for other services, that might not work. You might need to do it in a as it happens, because if it was something like neonatal cots, you'd need to know right there, right then, you know, what's available. But for us, that's what worked. And then in the early days, we had a project worker who would check and chase the services that hadn't updated. And then we went from that to an automatic reminder. And actually the buy-in came so quickly, because I think, as I said earlier, people recognize the problem. So, and I think that's such a key to all of this stuff, is that if it's a problem that other people are suffering with and they recognize, then they're absolutely buy into a solution that will fix it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. And in terms of the pathway tool, how long roughly does that take to complete for a health professional or a family member?
So I think between the two assessments that we've embedded in there, there's about 21 questions. But if you literally, the most accurate way to complete it is not to overthink it. So it should be quite quickly done, and you do it on your phone, and you know, it's usually a choice of 4 answers, just tick and do the next one, tick and do the next one. So it shouldn't be something that people labor over. So it should be sort of minutes to go through. It's not something that's really sort of time consuming.
Okay, great, thank you. And in terms of sort of your own personal journey in the digital world, how have you felt being involved in these projects?
I've absolutely loved it, actually. As I say, I still think it's quite hilarious that I've been involved with them, because I am the most untechnical person that you could find. So even the fact that I'm here presenting about it is quite funny. But I think it's realizing that you do have something to offer, and you absolutely don't have to be that technical person. There's a whole another career pathway out there that's those people. But as a health professional, you have so much knowledge. And as a sort of, if you're at the coalface, you often absolutely know what the problems are. But it's owning those problems and highlighting them. If you've got a problem that you think is causing a waste of time and resources, that's the most important thing we can do in health at the moment, I think, is to really try and iron out some of those bumps in the road and make it as smooth as possible. And if we can do some of that by pulling in technology, then I think that's amazing.
Perfect, thank you. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you so much again for your presentation. It was really interesting. So yeah, thank you so much, Jenny. Speak to you soon.
You're welcome.
And so next up, we have Hayley Peake from Serco, who's the Health and Social Care Director there. And she will be talking to us today about enhancing patient and nurse experience through new technologies. So as I mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions for Hayley, then please do pop them in the chat box, and we'll have a few minutes at the end of her session to go through those. So introducing Hayley, welcome.
Hi there, Megan. Thanks for having me. So I'm just going to share my slides. Give me one moment. Hopefully you can all see that now. So as Megan mentioned, my name is Hayley Peake and I am the Health and Social Care Director for Serco. And what that means is I have the responsibility for looking after a number of prisons and immigration centres and ensuring that healthcare is enabled in that setting. I've been a nurse for around 17 years now, and actually a lot of the work that I do builds on my previous experience, which has been military, primary care, prisons and public health. So just going into the main, apologies, I think my screen is not showing. I'll leave it on that one there and hopefully we'll be able to run through. So really similarly to what Jenny described previously, when we started to look at this technological solution, I really wanted to understand the issue. I'm used to having a problem, trying to fix it, and then thinking of all the different operational ways we can do that. And the problem we had for this project was just around medications management in prisons. And what the issue was is that we'd seen a number of increases in medications over the last 10 years. So when I started as a nurse in prisons, we'd have around 10 people in the queue in a number of locations across the site. But now we're seeing an excess of 80% of prisoners on medications. And so to really understand what the solution might look like, we really needed to consider what was causing that issue. So we really did a deep dive on that. So we knew there was an increased prisoner population. There was unprecedented increase in the ageing population in prisons as well as increase in long-term poor conditions amongst that population. We had the illicit economy, which is around substance misuse and how that might manifest. And also we saw a national increase in the prescribing of medication and changes in legislation around supervised medications. And finally, we had the issue around space. Prisons are a finite footprint. They have a restricted area. When prisons were set up, medications weren't on the agenda. So actually retrofitting the spaces was really, really challenging. And we found that across all of the prisons that we surveyed as part of this project. And what we also knew is we tried a number of operational solutions that I mentioned previously. So we'd added additional staff, we tried new spaces, we tried different ways of delivering medications, and none seemed to work. So we had to really look at what the other solutions might look like as part of that as well. And not only did we know what was causing the problem, we had to really look at what those issues were for the people that were either receiving the medications, so the prisoners, but also for those clinical staff and operational staff that were trying to deliver medications in this setting. And the issues that we identified were those delays in regimes. And for people that haven't worked in prisons, that's the times at which you can do things in the prison. So meds are normally at 3 or 4 times a day. And actually, they're at the times of the days where there's movement to activity for food, when you're accessing any other association, and medications fall within those times. So it delayed or restricted people from accessing those activities. It caused flashpoints for violence as well, because if you're in a long queue or you're waiting a long period of time, you get to the front of the queue and your clinician tells you that your medications are not available. Clearly that causes a frustration. And for our population, that was a real challenge. There's bullying to trade, particularly around the substance misuse cohort. And we also knew that this reduced the control and independence for the population. Nowhere else that I have seen would you have all of your medications delivered to you unless you was in hospital. And actually we wanted to really ensure that people were independent around their medications management. And for our clinical staff, the issues were predominantly the same, really. Not only were the delays in regimes affecting what the prisoners could access, it also meant that nurses and clinicians were getting late to clinics. They found it really frustrating because they don't deliver this anywhere else. It took a long period of their working day, and actually in the spaces that I've identified, the infrastructure where there's normally not a window, it's in a small space with lots of medication, it became quite stressful. The safety issues, so where there's flashpoints for violence, there's a clinician on the end of that, so ensuring that we knew that that was an issue. And also this was the highest area of complaints for all of our healthcare providers. So we knew why the issue was occurring, we knew what the issue was impacting, but we then really needed to drill down into how we could make a change. So when we're talking about medications in prisons, there's normally two types. Those that are in possession, so prisoners can have them in their cell, so normally around blood pressure, cholesterol, low risk medications, and those that are not in possession. So those medications that will either be tradable amongst the cohort, or actually will, if somebody is at risk and needs to be monitored around them. So those medications are the ones in the middle there on that picture. So diazepam, tramadol, pregabalin, all of those medications. And when we looked into these medications, firstly, what struck us is our assumptions were right. Medications had gone up. So in that top right graph there, you can see that for the number of people in the prison, which is the lower red bar, these are the number of medications. It's huge. There's a huge volume of medications in each of the 3 prisons that are identified there. But also that a high proportion were those that should be in possession. And actually in possession medications, those that you pick up the pharmacy, you don't need a nurse or a clinician supervising those. And when we really looked into the in possession medications, we realised that whilst only sort of say 51 or 44% were in possession, up to 80% could be in possession. So nurses wouldn't have to stand at the hatches. So we knew we needed to target in possession medications because legally we were able to give those without a clinician, and also there was a large proportion of medication, so it could solve some of the problems we were looking at. And when we was looking at this project, as I mentioned, I oversee about 6 or 7 prisons and 2 immigration removal centres. Selection of the prison was really crucial. What we were proposing is developing and designing a tech solution to meds. So we needed to make sure that we had the right healthcare partner and the right tech partners as well. So we selected HMP Dovegate. That's a category B male prison in Uttoxeter. It has the capacity for 1,160 male residents or prisoners. The operator is Serco, who I work for, and the healthcare provider is Practice Plus Group. And the partner that we used for our tech solution was Tracker and also Unilink, who provide the software. And in that, what did we create? So this is what we created. It's a medication distribution locker. You can see there's a number of components there, and whilst I always get told off for this, I really liken it to a Amazon locker for medications. It's similar, although albeit the design was process was very different. And you can see here there was a lot of thought that went into the design. So the numbering, what the IT would look like, but also the size of the compartments that are there. So we reviewed a number of pharmacies, looked at a number of processes to make sure that we got that shape and size right. And you'll see at the bottom there was larger components because or compartments, because we were thinking about dressings, creams, lotions that might need to be accessed as well. So what this locker does is it means that in possession medications can be loaded in here. So a clinician, either a nurse or a pharmacy technician, will take the medications rather than taking them to the dispensary where they would normally be given. They would get a print off sheet, load the lockers. The lockers then send an alert to the prisoners to let them know that their medications have arrived. Once that has been completed, a list is given to the officers of all the prisoners who are collecting medications that day. The prisoners will be called down. They use their fingerprints and biometric onto the locker in the bit where you can see the flashing red light on the picture. That opens their bay, which is individual for them at that point in time. It's normally randomly selected. They collect the medications, shut the door, and can go back into their cell. And it's just the key features here. So even though that's the process, what does that do? Why is that important? I suppose the key thing here is it provides that flexibility for prisoners and notifies them when their medication is collected. Now, this was kind of a side product of one of the main techniques design, but it's one of the huge things that prisoners and staff have reported back that's had real benefits for them. So previously, prisoners would have to go up a couple of times, check if their medications were there. That causes excess activity, but also real frustration for the prisoners. Now they knew when their medications were loaded, and they could also message pharmacy directly from the technology that was built into the process. It also enhances patient safety, so ensuring the correct person is collecting their medications. In prisons, they have ID cards to say, and I would have mine that would say Hayley Peak. My picture might be 10 years old, depending on my sentence, and actually can be passed around amongst prisoners. By using a biometric, we knew that there's a much higher threshold for prisoners to ensure that it's them, and actually that there couldn't be anybody collecting medications that weren't their own. So a really positive side effect as well. We had an audit trail around medications too, so not only about when the patients had collected them, but also which staff had loaded the medications, so that we knew there was a much more efficient pathway. Previously, they would be put into cupboards, and actually trying to figure out where they went or what their journey was really problematic for staff. So now had an audit trail to say A, that prisoners had collected their medications, but B, who had loaded them. And I think also on the same vein there, it's about prisoners that didn't collect their medications. So if the medications hadn't been collected, clinicians can see that at the end of the day, and if there's a high risk individual amongst that group, then they can go and follow them up much more easily. Again, previously it's been a manual process looking through all the medications within a house block dispensary, trying to figure out who hadn't attended. And then I think finally as well, it's allowing clinicians to concentrate on other higher risk solutions. So we move more medications into in possession, which save more time, less stress on the clinicians for actually getting to other activities, but also less stress at that one point in time where they're giving out medications, a lot of medications to a lot of prisoners. So we rolled it out in HMP Dovegate. So initially we trialled it on the therapeutic community in HMP Dovegate, and then rolled it out to all 3 house blocks. And now this solution is in not only Serco prisons, so it's in nearly all of Serco prisons. We just have one final rollout that's going to happen next month actually. It's in an IRC, but it's also rolled out to HMPPS, or the Prison Services prisons, and a number of other healthcare providers. We're waiting for 11 further sites to be installed. We have business cases that are pending to just roll it out even further, and we've published our first piece of research around this, which is really useful. But the key bit was also for us is that making a solution that really met the aims of the clinicians that were using it, but also the prisoners. So before we set out and embarked on this project, although we knew the problems, we wanted to make sure that our solution was fit for purpose. I've been on the receiving ends of lots of innovation that's not met the task, so I wanted to make sure that we'd done what we said we was going to do, but also a number of stakeholders were involved in this and that everybody was clear about their responsibilities. So in terms of feedback, I won't go into all of this, but it was really extensive. We made sure that we had pre and post implementation surveys around medications, pre-implementation reviews and focus groups around our assumptions with not only the healthcare provider Practice Plus group, but a number of our other healthcare providers to just really check and challenge what we decided as a project group. Our weekly project group met consistently face-to-face pre-COVID, and then we also had a different hybrid method during COVID, but also most importantly that post-implementation feedback loop as well. So ensuring that we've got the focus groups, and they're still going on because we're continually evolving this concept. And what did the people say that are using this concept? So the patient feedback or the prisoners, I again have rolled out a number of initiatives with prisoners, and normally we get a bit of feedback that was considered to be negative, and I really struggled to get some negative feedback on this, but even when we was in the teething stages around making amendments to see what it looked like. And here's just some of the feedback from what patients said. So they said it improved their awareness of their medications, much more compliant for meds, less disruptive to their day, but also that autonomy, ability to be able to pick when they collect their medications like they would in the community. It was consistent, increased ownership and control, and also improved privacy, which again was another area which we really struggle with in prisons. And I think there's a couple of quotes there, but I think my favourite one is the best thing I have seen in a prison, and I've been in a lot of prisons, but they've said brilliant, makes life less stressful, I don't have to queue for ages, and that was really important. But our clinical teams as well really embraced this. When we was going through the focus groups, there was lots of feedback around the fact that clinicians might not embrace it. It was new, quite different to what they already delivered. But our team, Practice Plus group, really have embraced this, and all of the teams that we've rolled out to have really found it useful. So the key things that they told us was it increases self-management and independence. It was quicker for nurses and easier and less stressful. It improved compliance around the medications, and improved the processes in the nurses' experience, which was a key output. Had better communication with prisoners as well. It wasn't always as adversarial about where are my meds and what does that look like. So much more improved processes. The patients didn't have to wait. It improved the privacy, but also decreased the drug errors as well, which was another output that we was monitoring. And you can see there's a number of quotes, but a more streamlined service, a great piece of kit, futuristics, and works well, and encourages independence. And I think our final key stakeholders, all the custodial staff who enable medication. And even though they had less to say, the key thing was save 45 minutes on the regime. So taking the stress out of their day, there was much more flexibility, saved missed medications, reduced that frustration, and improved the partnership working as well, because it's always a contentious task between custodial staff and the clinicians, and really just reducing the overlap of tasks. But this was a complicated project, and we did learn a number of lessons throughout the way, and I've got a couple here. And I think the key thing for me was around ensuring that you've got the approvals and the buy-in. There's a lot of cost to this, a lot of governance, lots of people have to sign it off. So making sure you're really clear from the start and understanding your issue. If you're fixing something that nobody wants you to fix, it's really hard to get that approval and buy-in. We didn't have those issues because actually this was a problem for all of the stakeholders. But understanding the issue, clear aims and objectives, and making sure that you got their team engagement as well. I mentioned that we started at HMP Dovegate. We'd initially targeted another prison, and the clinical team said that it wasn't really going to achieve all of the outcomes that we'd hoped there. So we ensured that we moved elsewhere. The design is a key thing. I'm not an IT expert by a long stretch. I didn't know anything around lockers, biometrics when I went into this project. I didn't need to know everything. I've got an IT department who we linked in with, and if they didn't know, we found out other people. And actually what we agreed is that this was new, nobody had done it before. So actually there was scope for error when we put them in, as long as it wasn't being tested with prisoners at that point. So we all accepted that there was a margin of risk, and we managed that throughout the process. Fortunately, none of those risks come to fruition. All of the experts pulled together and really worked together. But what I was very clear on is I just needed to ask the questions, which is how would it work? What would it look like? Who was going to access? And all those clear questions. And then someone needed to give me an answer and be held accountable for that. So our IT and tech experts were absolutely worth their weight in gold. We needed patient and staff engagement. Again, it's quite a different way of delivering things. If we were doing something wrong that they wouldn't like or wouldn't work well, we really needed to know what that would look like, otherwise we wouldn't get our benefits. And I think there's that kind of try again mentality. We've made loads of changes to this concept as we've gone through. Most of it is upgrades, improving the functionality, how that might work, but always being prepared to make sure that you can make those changes as you go through is really important. I think the key thing for me as well was expecting barriers. I like my tech designs to go smoothly and seamlessly, but as Jenny mentioned earlier, actually a number of these issues, if you haven't had them before or you don't know what they look like or how they'll manifest, you really need to expect those barriers. If you add things on, it's more clunky and actually more can go wrong. And learning that was really important for me. So engaging widely, make sure that you've got that feedback and presenting the findings and allowing people really to pick up on what you're delivering and give their feedback. Governance was also crucial, so as you're developing it, making sure that you've got those standard operating procedures, a review process as I mentioned earlier, but also the cost. I was fortunate enough to develop this with partners for free. That's really unusual and I was really grateful for that, but making sure that the cost was sustainable when we was rolling it out further. So actually if we developed something that wasn't achievable, wasn't affordable, we knew we wouldn't roll it out. So what would that look like and how would it impact other colleagues moving forward? And I think the cost, the sustainability of the project as well. So making sure that we were focusing on quality and not cost and keeping everybody's eye on the ball for that. And I had to draw a number of my stakeholders back to say it's not a cost initiative. This is we're looking at quality. We know what the challenges are. How can we prove that? It has had a cost impact. So we know that the activity is lower in this regard now, but keeping everybody's focus on the fact that quality was the key part. And I think the final bit in terms of lessons learned were my crucial components were the patient feedback was key. I've touched on it a couple of times, but the biometric reader that we'd initially installed, so where you get your fingerprint scanned, was really cumbersome. The prisoners didn't like it, they didn't want to engage with it. So actually following feedback, we changed that out. There was an alarm added to the top because in order for the next person to get their medications, the locker door has to be closed. And a number of our men weren't closing the doors, not for any reason. They just didn't push them shut, and actually that meant the next person couldn't get their meds. So there was an alarm now. If the door's not shut, it will just alarm to let the person know that they need to do that. We also changed the locker access time, so giving people, particularly with disabilities, longer to access their meds and then close it after. But also built into that you can only access it once, because we didn't want prisoners to store illicit items in the lockers and then try to re-access. And we also covered the touch screen as well, because that was causing confusion for the prisoners. And the staff feedback was absolutely brilliant. Our lead pharmacist on this project was again really beneficial throughout the whole process. We changed the locker layout, so we had less larger bays. We changed the numbering, the setup. We also changed the way that it was inputted to report. And I think one of the key things we'd initially started, we thought that there would be some errors. So there was a manual process of using keys to unlock the lockers, and then we built into it that could be opened by biometrics. So again, saving lots of time. So continually evolving and adapting, and we're always adding things. So what do the reports look like, and how does that improve? So making it clear that we've got a concept that works, but how can we improve that continually? And our clinicians are fully on board with that and supporting us to develop that technology. And I suppose having a control process around that. So where I make a change to my lockers, does that affect all of the others that are rolled out as well? So we also have a national governance group to oversee what those projects look like and prioritise them. And on that partnership working, so I've got a stakeholder map that I think highlights around 55 different key stakeholders, making sure they're clear, making sure that we're meeting the regulatory requirements and engaging with all of them to get it over the line. It's really time consuming. It is a bit painful, and it did delay my project at a number of points in time. However, it paid dividends in the end, because everybody knew what it was doing. They had the chance to ask their questions and advised us of what processes we needed to get this project clear, and also overcame barriers. So at the point we knew that we started installing, all of these stakeholders were really infused by the project and really took away some of the barriers, particularly around cost. And as I mentioned, the final bit is just continually improving. So we're improving the lockers, but also those operational processes as well. So we've seen a lot more pharmacy technicians now getting engaged with the project, which frees nurses up to go back to clinics rather than nurses being the main dispensers of medications within the prisons. We've seen a lot of processes change around when meds can be delivered, and that takes a lot of stress out of the process. But also those bits around functionality and sharing lessons. We share all of our lessons, all of the things that we've learned with anybody else that is hoping to roll this out and have a bank of materials to make sure that actually, if anybody wants to do this, they can pick up the documents and run with it really easily. Any questions?
Thank you very much for that, Hayley. That was really interesting. Yeah, as I mentioned, the chat box is open. We have a few minutes for questions before we have to finish. So I just wondered if you could tell us how important you think it is to have the nursing voice in innovations such as this, and to have that nursing knowledge and nursing background when you're making changes like this.
I think it's really important, to be honest. So when I'd first picked this up, and it's not my idea by any stretch of the imagination, but lots of people tried to do this, but they weren't clinicians. They didn't understand the processes, and they didn't understand how to relay it. So having a clinician be involved in the project, leading the project, meant that actually all those barriers that you wouldn't pick up if you hadn't been involved in this process were really heard right at the beginning. And when issues were popping up, so a lot of our clinicians come up with really valid points about some parts of the process that might be difficult, knowing when they're actually real barriers, understanding the issue and what that might look like, but also knowing the ones that are not and the things that can be resolved as well. So really pushing that forward. But I think all of the projects that I'm currently engaged in, if you didn't have a clinician's voice leading it, I don't think that they would be progressed at the rate that they are currently. So I think it's definitely a new area, and that more and more people need to get involved in driving it from a clinical perspective to make sure that we can really lead the way and ensure that what we're getting is what that we need for us to do our job more efficiently, but also easier.
Perfect, thank you. And I can see Jenny's asked a question. It actually was on my list as well, but I'm interested to know how the patients or the prisoners, get notified about when their medications are ready and in the lockers. That's quite an interesting process.
Yes, so in Serco prisons, we have what's called a kiosk. So it is literally like a screen in a box, and that will tell them when they've got appointments throughout the day. They can order their canteen, so food things, and book visits. So they have those, and that is what tells them that their appointment is ready. In some of our prisons, that's now in cell. So it pops up in cell to let them know that the medications are ready. In prisons that don't have that, so in some of the public sector prisons, they'll send the list via the officers to make sure prisoners are aware.
Okay, lovely. And just quickly, how many nurses or staff are monitoring this process?
So it really does depend on the size of the prison. So in HMP Ashfield, which is our prison that's got roughly around 400 prisoners, there is a couple of nurses and pharmacy techs that do that on a day-to-day basis. In Dovegate, where this started, it's like it's an enterprise in itself. So it's less clinicians than to deliver the medications, but it's moved to pharmacy tech. So you're talking on an average day to run it, 2 people to load it, and 2 people that are sorting out the medications in the pharmacy as you would normally have, and we have a lead pharmacist that oversees it too.
Okay,
So
lovely.
About 4.
And I guess it depends when you roll it out as well, sort of the size of the locker and differences in that respect as well. Is that right?
It absolutely does. So one of my prisons has got about 800 men in it, but it's got 5 house blocks of 5 different locations. So we went for smaller units, and then they're on each one of the house blocks. So it's a modular design. It's quite hard to see in the picture, but it's roughly about 12 or 14 bays, and you can add them on there to make them bigger if you need more capacity within the lockers.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I think I need to wrap up now, but thank you so much for your time today and for speaking to us about this. It's so interesting. Yeah, it's been lovely speaking with you, and thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you to the audience out there for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And we have another session on in just over 10 minutes time, so please stay tuned for that as well. Thanks very much. Bye.